case of Savannah Gold. In 2017, Sherry's world was turned upside down in Florida when her daughter Savannah failed to show up for work at the restaurant where she was employed. Sherry was unaware that this ordinary day would be the last time she'd see Savannah. An hour later, the restaurant called Sherry to inform her that Savannah hadn't arrived for her shift, which was unusual since she had never missed work before. However, the events that unfolded after that call were even more bizarre. When Savannah's father received a message on her behalf, riddled with spelling mistakes and lacking punctuation, he instantly knew it wasn't his 21-year-old daughter who had written it. The impersonator claimed Savannah had met an amazing guy, fallen in love, and decided to elope with him, promising to call later. Savannah's father, Daniel Gold, carefully read the text message, paying close attention to its content. He knew his daughter well and was convinced that running away with her boyfriend was out of character for her. While Daniel studied his phone screen, trying to make sense of the message, Savannah's older brother Chris received a similar text, saying she was leaving with her boyfriend and that she was okay. Daniel's instincts told him something was wrong, so he immediately started calling his daughter's phone, only to find it turned off. Savannah Page Gold was born on April 26, 1996, to Daniel and Sherry Gold. She lived with her parents and older brother, Chris, in Jacksonville, Florida. Savannah enjoyed various hobbies, including playing lacrosse, drawing, and dancing. Those close to her believed she embodied her last name, being a loving, kind, and caring person always willing to help others. After graduating from high school, Savannah turned down a college scholarship for art and design to care for her mother, Sherry, who had been diagnosed with cancer and was undergoing chemotherapy. To support her mother, Savannah took on household responsibilities and also worked as a waiter at Bonefish Grill, a restaurant. By the summer of 2017, she had been working at the restaurant for 2 years. On August 2nd, Savannah left for work at around 5 p.m. wearing her uniform, as her shift was scheduled to start at 5:30 p.m. However, less than an hour later, Sherry received a call from the restaurant asking why Savannah had not shown up for work. This surprised Sherry, as she knew her daughter was responsible and had seen her leave the house in her uniform, indicating that she had indeed gone to work. After Savannah's father received a suspicious phone call, her father and brother started getting strange messages that they didn't think were from her. They suspected someone was impersonating Savannah. Before this, Savannah's father had tried to contact the police, but he couldn't reach his daughter. She was reported missing, and the police launched a search for her. Since sending those messages, Savannah's phone and social media accounts have been inactive. The police first went to the establishment where she worked to investigate. They found her unlocked car in the parking lot, about 120 yards from the restaurant entrance. Her personal documents, wallet, cards, cash, and other valuable items were still inside the car. It was clear to the police that the story about Savannah running away with her lover was a lie. If Savannah had planned to disappear, she would have taken her documents and bank cards with her to avoid being traced. It didn't make sense that she would leave them behind in her car. Initially, there were no signs of a struggle or crime near or inside the car, except for the flat left front tire. Forensic experts were called to investigate, and detectives visited the restaurant to speak with Savannah's coworkers. However, they all claimed that Savannah hadn't come to work that day and that no one had seen her. The presence of Savannah's car parked 120 yards from the restaurant led detectives to suspect that something might have happened to her after she arrived at work. They began canvassing local establishments, particularly those with surveillance cameras, to review the footage and identify the moment Savannah parked her car. Although the image quality was poor, the police were able to see from the footage that Savannah parked her car, got out, and walked to a nearby silver Chevrolet Malibu sedan. For 14 minutes, she stood next to the driver's door, talking to the person behind the wheel. She then opened the back door and got in, and the driver followed suit. The police watched as the car shook, and the back door swung open 3 times before being closed again. Officers suspected that a fight had broken out inside the car between Savannah and the Chevrolet's owner. Shortly after, the man exited the car, approached Savannah's vehicle, opened the driver's door, and removed something from inside. He then punctured the front left tire, got back into his vehicle, and drove away without Savannah ever getting out. The owner of the Chevrolet Malibu was quickly identified as Lee Rodarte, a 28-year-old manager and chef at the restaurant where Savannah worked. He had helped distribute flyers with Savannah's picture during the police investigation and claimed not to have seen her for about 3 weeks, citing their different work shifts. However, when detectives re-interviewed restaurant employees, they discovered that Lee and Savannah's relationship went beyond a professional one. Several people came forward to reveal that the two had met secretly after hours and were romantically involved, a fact that Lee had failed to disclose to the police. On August 5th, during his work shift, Rodarte was arrested and taken to the police station for questioning. When he arrived, he immediately warned the detectives that he struggled with reading and writing. In response, they thoroughly explained his rights, including his right to an attorney and the fact that anything he said could be used against him in court. Rodarte then admitted that he had previously lied to the police when they interviewed the restaurant staff, saying he hadn't seen Savannah in a long time. In reality, he had seen her on the day she went missing, but he was afraid that if he told the truth, he would become a suspect in her disappearance, which is why he had lied. Lee said he had met Savannah about 2 years ago when she started working at the restaurant. However, their socializing outside of work began around 8 months ago. At that time, he was already in a relationship with someone named Chelsea. When Chelsea discovered he had been unfaithful to her, she ended their relationship. Rodarte claims he dated Savannah for 3 months before she started using illegal drugs, which led him to end their relationship and reunite with Chelsea. Following the breakup, Rodarte and Savannah allegedly agreed to maintain a professional relationship limited to their work at the restaurant, as per company policy prohibiting romantic relationships among employees. Rodarte also states that Savannah had disclosed their intimate relationship to other waiters with the intention of getting him fired. Lee last saw Savannah on a Wednesday afternoon. He drove to the mall on August 2nd to talk to her and persuade her not to spread rumors about their relationship as he feared losing his job at the restaurant where he had worked for 5 years. When he met her, Savannah had just taken a strong substance and was panicking, so she asked if she could sit in his car for a bit. Once inside, he demanded that she stop telling people they were still dating. Savannah asked him to join her in the back seat so they could talk. After moving to the back seat, Lee again asked Savannah to stop spreading rumors, but she refused, saying she would do as she pleased. This response infuriated Lee, who then got out, slashed a tire on Savannah's car and returned. When Savannah asked why he had done it, Lee admitted he was upset and angry. Next, as Rodarte claimed, Savannah exited his vehicle and headed towards the mall entrance, but didn't reach it. Instead, she got into an old green Ford pickup truck with tinted windows. At this point, she was holding her phone. However, detectives were aware that Savannah never left Rodarte's car and that he was lying. Unbeknownst to Rodarte, the police had surveillance footage that disproved his claim, showing no Ford pickup truck and Savannah remaining in his car. When asked about subsequent events, Lee stated that he drove home, even detailing the streets he took. Notably, the man had scratches on his arms and neck, which he attributed to a workplace injury when questioned about their origin. When detectives directly asked Rodarte about Savannah's whereabouts, he claimed to have no knowledge. The detectives adjusted their questioning strategy. At first, they listened attentively to his stories, showing interest, but soon they applied gentle pressure. They informed him straightforwardly that evidence contradicted his claim that Savannah had exited his car. After a brief time, Rodarte altered his statement, asserting that he and Savannah had gone to his residence, and then she departed. The detectives remained skeptical and urged him to reveal the entire truth, considering Savannah's family's well-being. Rodarte ultimately admitted to fatally snapping Savannah's neck during a backseat argument in his vehicle. Following their departure from the parking lot, he sent messages to Savannah's father and brother from her phone, before discarding it out the window. Rodarte returned the body to his property, intending to dispose of it by fire, but he soon discovered it wasn't as simple as he thought. Instead, he dug a hole and buried the body, only to later exhume it, wrap it in a blanket, and drive approximately 8 miles from the restaurant to a nearby pond where he discarded the body. Although the autopsy couldn't determine the exact cause of Savannah's death, the examination revealed that her neck wasn't broken, as Rodarte had claimed, and no illegal substances were found in her body. However, forensic experts discovered that the thyroid cartilage in Savannah's throat was fractured, suggesting strangulation, and roughly 75% of her body exhibited fire damage. Despite confessing to the crimes, Rodarte maintained his not guilty plea on charges of second-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and abuse of a dead body. The autopsy revealed that the condition of Savannah's body was too compromised to determine an exact cause of death. Contrary to Rodarte's claims, her neck was not broken and no illegal substances were found in her system. However, the autopsy did indicate that Savannah was strangled as her thyroid cartilage was broken and approximately 75% of her body had been burned. Rodarte's confession was revoked at trial, where he claimed he acted in self-defense, alleging that Savannah had initiated the strangulation. This reversal put Savannah's family through additional trauma, forcing them to attend numerous court hearings. Sherry Gold, Savannah's mother, has battled recurring cancer during this ordeal, but she remains committed to attending every hearing alongside her family. They have been present at 26 out of 27 hearings, enduring the emotional toll of facing Rodarte, the man responsible for their daughter's death. The family's primary concern now is to bring this painful process to a close and secure justice for Savannah. Lee Rodarte was not the only family member to be charged with murder. In 2016, a year before Lee committed his crime, his sister Amber Camarillo, then 26 and still known by her maiden name Rodarte, shot and killed a woman during a dispute over a car. She received a 20-year prison sentence. Lee Rodarte was offered a plea deal, which required him to plead guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for a 40-year prison sentence. In return, the charges of tampering with physical evidence and abuse of the body would be dropped. After consulting with his attorneys, Rodarte accepted the deal and was sentenced to 40 years in prison on March 11, 2021. Following the verdict, Savannah's family expressed gratitude to everyone for their support. Daniel Gold stated that they loved Savannah and were overwhelmed to discover how many others also cared for her. Joshua Randall Harmon was born August 14, 1979 to Larry and Sherry. He would go by the name Josh and lived in Roswell, Georgia. He often played outside his apartment building, searching for ducks and turtles around the lake in the complex, and played in the fort in the woods behind his building. On May 15, 1988, 8-year-old Josh had been playing outside all day. His mother said that he was in and out of the apartment throughout the day. When she started making dinner, she asked her husband, Josh's stepfather, to tell him to stay close to home. But when he went to tell him, Josh was nowhere to be found. They would then report him missing to the police. A neighbor stated that he had stopped by their home about 7 p.m. and asked if his friend could come outside to play, but the family was eating dinner, so the boy could not come outside yet. Josh would then tell the neighbor that he was going to wait for him in the woods at the fort where they often played together. This is the last time Josh was seen alive. Sadly, his body would be found in a wooded area near his apartment building 2 days later. He was buried partially clothed under loose dirt and pine straw. After his death, Sherry would be hospitalized for several days and would later move away from the area. Despite the collection of good evidence, the case would go cold. As technology advanced, investigators would continue re-examining the evidence in his case in hopes of solving it. In February of 2021, his family gave police permission for his body to be exhumed in hopes of finding new evidence. The Roswell Police Department was granted funding by the Georgia Sexual Assault Kit Initiative Task Force to pursue additional DNA testing on evidence from the crime scene. Soon after, police announced that the results of the DNA testing connected Josh's murder to a sex offender by the name of James Michael Coates. On July 21, 2021, 33 years after the murder, police stopped an Uber that was carrying 56-year-old James and arrested him on charges of murder, assault, aggravated sodomy, child molestation, and tampering with evidence. At the time of the murder, James lived in the same apartment complex on Rain Tree Crossing as Josh and his family. James had twice been convicted of similar crimes in 1990 and 1993. After the 1993 conviction, he spent 20 years in prison and was released in 2013. Authorities said investigations continue into whether he is linked to any other crimes. While an arrest has been made, Police say it's still an active investigation. A few years ago, his mother posted online praising the local Roswell Fire Department for their support during his funeral procession and the respect they showed. However, she had replied to a Reddit post saying the reason his case had yet to be solved was due to a botched investigation and claimed that 8 pages of evidence was destroyed 3 years after his murder. She claimed that she could never get a clear answer as to how or why that happened. Sadly, though, Josh's mother passed away in October of 2020 before her son's case was nearing justice and before the arrest of the suspect was made. Michelle Martenko was born October 6, 1961 in Cedar Rapids, Iowa to Albert and Janet. She attended Cedar Rapids Kennedy High School and performed in choirs and theater productions. When she was a senior in high school, she had plans to attend Iowa State University to study interior design, but her life was cut short. On December 19, 1979, at the age of 18, she attended a banquet for the Kennedy Concert Choir. After the event, she asked her friend and twirling squad teammate if she wanted to join her on a shopping trip to the Westdale Mall, which had recently opened and also where Michelle worked. Her friend declined, and so she went along with $180 cash to pay off a coat that her mother had put on layaway but ultimately changed her mind on the coat. Once there, she shopped in the stores and spoke with friends and other people she knew who worked there. She was last seen at 8 or 9 p.m. outside of a jewelry store in the mall. By 2 a.m., when she failed to return home, her father reported her missing. At 4 a.m., police found her family's tan and green 1972 Buick Electra in the northeast corner of the mall parking lot by the JCPenney store. Michelle was found inside, collapsed over the passenger seat, and stabbed to death. The medical examiner later estimated she had died between the hours of 8 and 10 p.m. She was found fully dressed, and the medical examiner determined she had not been sexually assaulted. But it was not a robbery, as the cash she was carrying was still on her and her purchases were in the back seat. On June 19, 1980, police released a composite sketch developed based on descriptions provided by 2 witnesses of the man they believed stabbed Michelle. The sketch indicated a white man in his late teens or early 20s, weighing between 165 and 175 pounds and standing about 6 feet tall. During the original investigation, detectives compiled a list of more than 80 potential suspects, 60 of which were tested and cleared. Michelle had began dating Andy Seidel at the age of 16, and the pair were together for 2 years and then broke up. Friends say she didn't want to be in a committed relationship, and Andy apparently didn't take it too well. Police learned, suspiciously, Andy had run into Michelle at the mall that night. They brought him in for questioning, but he had an alibi for the time of the murder and police had no hard evidence pointing to Andy. They did find rubber glove indentations in some dirt on the outside of the car. They also found them inside the car in blood, and it was clear that the person was trying to conceal their identity. With a lack of evidence and leads, the case would go cold. Years later, Detective Larison was reading Michelle's file when he discovered that sometime earlier, another detective had sent blood scrapings found on the gear shift of the car out for testing, but nobody had followed up on the results. He found the lab report, and it showed that not only did the gear shift have DNA, but it was male DNA. The suspect had probably cut himself, and that's how his DNA and his blood got mixed with her blood on the gear shift. He then sent Michelle's dress to the lab for further testing. A spot of blood was found on her dress with a full male DNA profile, and it was consistent with the male DNA profiled on the gear shift. He shipped the blood samples to CODIS, the nationwide database of DNA collected from arrested offenders, but he never got a hit. Starting with locating all the people Cedar Rapids cops had originally interviewed, they collected DNA samples from over 100 different people. Cops had to convince them to take a DNA test, which was very time-consuming. At the top of the suspect list was Michelle's old boyfriend, Andy. He had lived for 27 years with many in his hometown, believing he was a killer. He voluntarily gave his DNA and was eliminated as a suspect. Detective Matt Denlinger reached out to Parabon Nanolabs, who can make a picture of a potential suspect from a DNA sample. They learned from that the suspect was probably a white male with blonde hair and blue eyes. Investigators had narrowed down the suspect's genetics, but they did not know his age or have a clue as to how he wore his hair. So different sketches were created, each with a different look. Parabon tested the DNA again using genetic genealogy to create a DNA family tree. Parabon searched a public national database called GED-Match of people who submitted their own DNA voluntarily to trace their own personal family trees. In July 2018, they found a relative by the name of Brandy Jennings, who was a second cousin once removed from the suspect living in Vancouver, Washington. Denlinger spent months building Brandy's family tree all the way back. As more blood relatives of Brandy provided their DNA, a genetic puzzle filled in and the detective reached out to Parabon once again. By October 2018, Detective Denlinger's painstaking ancestry searches had narrowed the suspects down to 3 brothers in Iowa, all of whom were still alive. They shared the same DNA with the blood found in Michelle's car and on her dress. They were Donald Burns, Kenneth Burns, and Jerry Burns. Dillinger and his team set up a plan to collect DNA samples from the brothers to see if any were a match, and they would do it without them knowing. They followed one brother to lunch and grabbed his straw. For the second, a toothbrush was collected from his garbage. And then they followed the third brother, Jerry Burns, to a pizza restaurant where he drank 2 sodas out of a glass with a straw. All 3 brothers were sent to the lab. Don and Kenneth were not a match, but the results showed Jerry Burns was an exact match. It turns out that Parabon's sketch of the suspect was very similar to a young Jerry Burns. He had no criminal record and was even a respected businessman with a wife and 3 kids. Denlinger picked a particular day to interview Burns at his business. December 19, 2018, exactly 39 years to the day after Michelle was murdered. When he interviewed Jerry, he had a recording device hidden inside a coffee mug. Burns denied any involvement in the murder of Michelle, but he did acknowledge that he had been to the mall with his family in the past. Despite his denials, the DNA was enough to arrest him for her murder. On the ride back to Cedar Rapids, a camera was rolling again in the police car, and it captured Jerry saying a few strange things about blocking stuff out and traumatic events. Detective Denlinger asked him if he thought it was possible that it happened and he just didn't remember any of it. Burns replied, "I'm sure something like that would be possible to block out. He blocked things out of your memories." However, for Jerry's family, it all came as a complete shock. His family didn't believe the man they knew and loved would ever be capable of such a gruesome act. In February of 2020, after 3 hours of deliberation, the jury found Jerry Burns guilty of first-degree murder of Michelle Mortenko. Iowa law mandates a life sentence without the possibility of parole for first-degree murder. Burns is currently imprisoned in the Anamosa State Penitentiary. Sadly, Michelle's father died in 1995 and her mother in 1998 before they saw their daughter's killer brought to justice. Corey Day Desmond was born March 18, 1980, at Torrance Memorial Hospital. And right from the start, she was the center of attention because she had to fight to survive. Due to a hole in her diaphragm, she had to undergo multiple surgeries. She was only given a 20% chance of survival. And miraculously, she not only survived, but she thrived. Friends and family of Desmond knew her as a smart, self-confident young woman, unafraid to express her opinion, who was energetic and full of affection for those she cared about, who were many. Desmond graduated from North Torrance High School and earned a master's degree in criminal justice from Long Beach State. Unsure of her calling in life, she changed her mind and decided to become a teacher. Her goal was to teach autistic children. A week after her death, a notice came in the mail that she had earned her teaching credential. She was loved by many and a friend to all. She was sweet at times, but could be tough as nails. She could command a bar full of patrons when she wanted, and all the while be singing one of her favorite karaoke songs, such as Black Velvet or These Boots Are Made for Walkin', and once again, being the center of attention. It was that secondary family that Corey acquired while working in those various establishments that kept her going back despite what her family wanted her to do. In 2009, Corey worked in a bar. On Saturday, February 14th, she had a shift that ended at 9:30 p.m. She then walked 2 blocks to the popular Bar Street Lounge. Many employees of this bar knew Corey as she had friends working there. She was caught on surveillance cameras helping her friends at the bar. She left there only after closing, around 2 a.m. None of her friends saw her after that. On Monday, February 16th, At approximately 2:20 p.m., the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Office received a terrifying call. About 100 miles from the bar where people last saw Corey, a driver stopped to take snow chains off the wheels. The man felt a strong, unpleasant smell as soon as he exited the car. He thought the source of the stench was an animal that had been hit by a car, but still decided to check. Not far from the car, he found something strange. He saw a black plastic garbage bag with a woman's body inside. The man ran out into the road in a panic, stopping cars and asking people to call the police as his phone's battery was dead. They identified the victim by fingerprints and driver's license. It was 28-year-old Corey Day Desmond. Subjected to a brutal attack, the woman died from strangulation. She had many bruises on her face and neck and injuries to the back of her head. Corey tried to fight back as she had several defense wounds. Although unable to determine the exact time of death, medical experts said Corey was on the street for about 12 to 36 hours before the man found her. Corey's pants were unbuttoned and pulled to her knees, but no signs of intimate contact were found. The first conclusion that investigators came to was that the place where the driver found Corey's body was not the place of her death. The criminal left her body by the side of the road, hoping it would take time to find it. Before the man found her body, the rain destroyed all possible evidence. Reporting bad news to the families of the dead or missing is perhaps the hardest thing in the work of a policeman. At that time, Corey was living with her grandmother. The news about the granddaughter's body found in a garbage bag shocked the woman, and this news was no less devastating for Mark, Corey's father. Mark knew perfectly well how the system worked. Sometimes the police delay the investigation for many months because they need a warrant to conduct searches, interrogations, and fingerprinting. There are cases when time-consuming bureaucracy slows down the process of solving a crime. Therefore, Mark decided not to sit and wait for the police to find the person who deprived him of his daughter. He decided to act. He said love for his daughter gave him the strength to look for the criminal. Mark found Corey's Jeep Wrangler in an alley next to the bar where she worked. He also discovered that Corey disappeared on the night of February 15th, but unfortunately, no one knew about it. Grandma did not panic because Corey was already an adult and could stay overnight with a friend or friends. In addition, she often worked late into the night and came home when her grandmother was already asleep. Investigators went to the bar where Desmond worked to find possible witnesses or leads. They talked to other employees and learned that Corey finished her shift at 9:30 p.m. and then went to another bar. She often did that. Her friends worked at that bar, and Corey often visited them at the end of her shift. She helped at the bar or chatted with friends while sitting at the counter. Besides, it brought her extra tips. Bar visitors knew her face well, and many perceived Corey as another employee. Surveillance cameras confirmed the words of the visitors. They captured the girl helping her friends at the bar. Unfortunately, a bartender's job is not only to pour drinks and entertain interlocutors. Sometimes, after drinking alcohol, some people stop controlling their emotions and their behavior becomes inappropriate. That evening, Corey was unlucky enough to meet such a person. According to eyewitnesses, she argued with a man who behaved provocatively. He bothered women and unceremoniously touched them, making unflattering compliments. While everyone was silent and did not dare to put this man in his place, Corey stood up for the bar's visitors. In other words, the girl explained to the man that he was not welcome there. The violent guest was furious but still agreed to leave. Corey continued to help her friends and made drinks at the bar as if nothing had happened. That evening, she consumed alcohol, but it did not affect her behavior. After 2 a.m., she left the bar alone and planned to go home. But as we now know, a man found Corey's lifeless body 100 miles from the bar the next day. Mark gave the police all the information he could find. Through television, he appealed to everyone to report any crucial information for the investigation. Meanwhile, the police identified the man Corey quarreled with before her death. During a conversation with investigators, the man said he did not know who Corey Desmond was. However, he did not deny having a big fight with the girl in a bar on February 14th. The man said alcohol made him uncontrollable, confirming that they kicked him out of the bar. Right after that, he went home to sleep. The suspect denied any involvement in the crime. He agreed to take a polygraph test and let the police search his house and car. They carefully examined the suspect's car. After all, there could have been traces like blood stains, hair, or something belonging to Corey. The car was dirty both inside and outside, and yet forensic experts did not find any evidence there. While searching the man's house, they found nothing indicating his involvement in the crime. The last hope of the investigators to catch the man in a lie was a polygraph test, but the man passed it without much difficulty, answering all the questions of the police. In addition, his wife confirmed that he came home before 2 a.m. and immediately went to bed. Corey left the bar around 2 a.m., which means this man was not involved in her death. Thus, the police excluded him from the list of suspects, but the problem was that they had no other persons of interest in this investigation. They studied Corey's personal life, trying to find out if she had enemies who could wish her harm. Investigators found out another strange detail. The owner of the bar where Corey worked said that that night, she came and asked for permission to use the toilet, but since the bar was closed, he refused the girl's request and advised her to go home. It was about 2:20 in the morning. What happened next remained a mystery because Corey never got in the car and did not go home. Investigators assumed that she had been abducted or assaulted near her place of work. However, the bar's surveillance cameras did not record this, and there were no witnesses on the street at such a late hour. At the time of Corey's death, her blood alcohol content was more than 4 times the legal limit for driving. It was unclear whether she planned to use her car or was looking for other ways to get home. Unfortunately, she did not meet anyone who would help her that night. A month later, the investigation reached a dead end. The police checked all the versions and clues but found no new suspects. Corey's father, Mark, wasn't going to give up. He rented 3 billboards on Artesia Boulevard in Redondo Beach. The billboards contained a photo of his daughter with the question, "Who killed Corey Day Desmond?" The man offered a $15,000 reward for any information helpful to the police. "I'm going to keep them up there to let people know the guy is still out there," Mark Desmond said. "Maybe it will save somebody." To some extent, this story is similar to that of Alexandra Kemp. The latter's father, Roger, did everything to find the criminal, and billboards played a crucial role in solving the crime. If you haven't watched this story yet, click on the link at the end of this video. Information about Corey periodically appeared on 50 electronic billboards. Eventually, it brought results. In May 2009, the phone rang at the police station. A woman named Tiffany saw one of the billboards with a photo of Corey. Thanks to this woman, the police were able to solve this case. Tiffany spoke very quietly. The woman was experiencing stress and severe fright. She rambled as if she didn't know where to start. Then she finally focused and said, "Hello, my name is Tiffany. I think my boyfriend, Tony Lopez Perez, killed that bartender girl, Corey Day Desmond. Please check him. He's behaving strangely, but I'll tell you more when we meet." Tiffany called several times to arrange a meeting with the detective. During their conversation in the park, the woman told him about her suspicions. According to her, on February 14th, she and Tony planned a romantic Valentine's Day dinner. She spent the whole evening preparing for a date. Tiffany took the children to their grandparents, visited a beauty salon, and bought a new red dress. Tony loved it when she wore red clothes. It drove him crazy. The guy was working that day but was supposed to return home around 11:30 p.m. Tiffany waited for Tony almost all night. The woman tried to contact him, but he did not answer calls and messages. Tony returned home at 4:30 in the morning and, as if nothing had happened, said he was too drunk to go home. He said he fell asleep in his car. Tiffany mentioned that Tony rarely cleaned the interior of his car. However, after a few days, he bought a whole set of cleaning products. He washed the car thoroughly, not letting her help. The guy's behavior seemed strange, but at that moment, she did not attach much importance to it. A few days later, Tony sold his white Dodge for almost nothing and bought another car. He also changed his phone number for no apparent reason. A little later, they had a joint trip to Big Bear Lake. They chatted along the way and everything seemed normal until Tony suddenly stopped the car on the side of the road. He turned to Tiffany and asked her, "Do you think this dead girl, what was her name, the bartender, was dumped here? I'm almost 100% sure that the police found her body here. Tony Lopez Perez and Tiffany lived together for about 4 years. They had a 6-year-old son together, but they never married. He was a hardworking man and got along well with everyone. He had never had any problems with the law. Perez came from a large family with 8 siblings. His parents grew up in the LA area, and Perez attended high school in Manhattan Beach. Tony's absence on the day of Corey's death, cleaning the car and urgently selling it, a strange trip, and an equally strange comment about where the police found her body, a change of phone number and odd behavior. Putting all these facts together, Tiffany realized that Tony could be the one who took the life of Corey Desmond. She didn't want to believe it. The investigators decided to talk to Tony and went to his house. To prevent him from suspecting anything, Tiffany agreed to play along with the police, not telling him anything about this conversation. It looked as if they were conducting a routine interview of people to find witnesses in the Corey Desmond case. Tony looked calm, like a person with nothing to hide. He wasn't nervous while answering all the questions. He said he didn't know her, mentioning he had only seen Corey in the newspapers. However, to arrest Tony Lopez Perez for taking the life of Corey, they needed hard evidence. Thus, the police found the new owner of the Dodge that Tony sold shortly after the news of Corey's death. The new owner confirmed that Tony sold his car for a low price. He allowed the police to check the vehicle for any evidence. Tiffany said Tony cleaned the interior thoroughly before selling his car. However, when the experts applied luminol and used an ultraviolet lamp, it became evident why Tony Lopez Perez got rid of his car. The interior of the car lit up in bright blue. Police asked Tony to come to the police station. They didn't tell him anything about the find, so he wouldn't run away. At first, he claimed he had never seen Corey, but later changed his testimony, saying he saw her near the bar and whistled at her. As soon as the police noticed that the man was changing his testimony, they showed him photos of the car he had sold and said that they had found crucial evidence there. This time, Tony claimed to have seen Corey outside the bar. Standing under a street lamp, she suddenly lost consciousness and fell on the sidewalk. He tried to help her, but she did not regain consciousness. Then he started slapping Corey on the cheeks. Corey opened her eyes and started screaming. She told him to get out and asked him to let her go. According to Tony, he got scared, put his hands over her mouth, and accidentally strangled her. Fearing he would get blamed for Corey's death, he put her body in the back seat of his car and drove home. Perez said he woke up during the night and went outside to see if it was a nightmare. I opened the door and it was not a nightmare, Perez told detectives. It was true. Perez said he went back inside and tried to get some sleep. In the morning, he went to work with Desmond's body still in the back seat. At the end of the working day, he placed her body in 2 garbage bags, took it to a remote area, and left it next to the side of the road. According to Tony's story, what he did to Corey was an accident. He claimed that he was drunk and scared. He accidentally strangled her in a state of panic, but Corey's injuries suggested otherwise. She had severe injuries on the back of her head, bruises on her face and neck, and defense wounds on her hands. Moreover, Corey's pants were down to her knees. Tony Perez was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The next day, he showed the police where he dumped Corey's body. In addition to Tony's confession, they now had the results of DNA tests. Corey's blood matched the blood found in the car that Tony sold immediately after committing the crime. At the 2011 trial, Coroner Jack Sheridan testified to the multiple contusions to the victim's head, the evidence of strangulation, and the blunt force trauma to her face. Sheridan also said she had scratches on her body that suggested the criminal dragged her after her death. Based on Corey's injuries, prosecutors said Perez assaulted her and tried to force her into intimacy in the early morning of February 15, 2009. Corey resisted. Unable to get what he wanted, Perez strangled her. Tiffany Ware testified during the trial. She told the San Bernardino County jury that her former boyfriend, Tony Lopez Perez, had an insatiable appetite for sex in January and February 2009. Even though they were making love almost every day, Ware said Perez was still not satisfied. Tiffany also told the court that Tony had twice engaged in intimacy with her against her will. It happened after the birth of their son and with an interval of about a month. Both incidents occurred when she was fast asleep on the couch after taking painkillers due to severe back pain. Perez, who chose not to testify at the trial, made his first statements to the court during his sentencing. He said he was taught to love and respect those around him, but that he veered off course at times. I forgot the key lessons I was taught about in life, which make me a man, a father, a loving uncle to many and a responsible person who supports his family that I so love, Perez said. In the end, I fell short. He generally stuck to the story his attorney Andrew Hanel presented at the trial, that he was scared and didn't mean to hurt Desmond. Hanel argued to a jury of 6 men and 6 women that Perez found her passed out on the sidewalk. He said he tried to calm her down and didn't mean to kill her. I should have thought before acting, Perez said. I should have stepped back and cleared my head. Fear took over. I was so scared, so careless. Corey's father, Mark Desmond, said his daughter had a beautiful future ahead of her before her life was cut short at the age of 28. Tony Perez should live the rest of his miserable life knowing he killed his own children's hopes and dreams at the same time he was killing Corey, her father said. He embodies all the characteristics that women in society fear. Just before sentencing, Perez asked God in the court to show him mercy. My very deepest apologies to the Desmond family and to my own family. I have brought such hurt and sorrow to the Desmonds that will forever shape their life. I hope he never gets out on the street again, said Desmond's grandmother Beverly. I hope he suffers as much as she suffered. In July 2011, a jury of 6 men and 6 women found 36-year-old Tony Lopez Perez guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Corey Desmond's family expressed gratitude to Tiffany Ware, thanks to whom the police solved this case. If it hadn't been for her, I don't think they would have ever found out it was him, said Leslie Schwab, a family friend who attended every day of the trial, along with about a dozen others in San Bernardino County. Janie Landers struggled with learning disabilities and behavioral issues that led to her being placed in Fairview Training Center, a group home in Salem, Oregon. When she was 18, she had the mental capacity of an 8-year-old child. In March of 1979, she disappeared from the group home and investigators initially believed she took off on her own, but still performed an investigation and spoke with the 4 employees who last saw her alive. The employees had spotted an unfamiliar man in the area in a yellow or gold-colored vehicle. According to one witness, a large pot-bellied man who was seen parked in his car got out and crossed the street to talk to Janie. The 4 witnesses worked with a Statesman Journal employee who drew a composite sketch of the man. Sadly, 5 days after her disappearance, Janie's body was found along a path near Silver Falls State Park. Despite an investigation, her case went cold. In March 2015, over 30 years later, Janie's sister Joyce asked Oregon State Police to reopen the investigation. She was hoping to find justice for her sister while her father was still alive. The case landed with OSP Detective Steve Hinkle, who began poring over hundreds of pages of police reports. He spoke with previous investigators and contacted any witnesses who were still alive. Forensic scientists sampled bloodstains on Janie's clothing, and in 2016, they discovered a man's DNA. The DNA matched that of Gerald Kenneth Dunlap, a twice-convicted sex offender who died in an Oregon prison in 2002 and had worked at Fairview in 1979. He had a violent and predatory criminal past and had been convicted of a sexual assault against a woman during an armed robbery in Tennessee in 1961 and was sentenced to life in prison, but was paroled only 12 years later. He first moved to California where he was forced to register as a sex offender, then to Oregon, which at the time had no requirement for sex offender registration. He married and soon found employment at the Fairview Training Center. He worked as a laundry employee at the center until 1983, when he was fired for inappropriate behavior towards women. DA officials said at the time of Dunlap's hiring, nationwide criminal records were not reliable or common and his co-workers likely would have not known about his violent past. In 1996, Dunlap was arrested and sentenced to prison where he would die in early 2002. Because he was convicted of a felony sex crime, Dunlap had been required to submit his DNA, which was still on file. The DNA match made Dunlap a strong suspect, prosecutors said, but Hinkle kept working to cement the connection and close the case. Because Fairview closed in the year 2000, employee records were difficult to track down. The detective was able to find payroll records confirming that Dunlap was working at the training center the day Janie disappeared. His job sorting laundry prior to washing made it highly improbable that his DNA could have transferred accidentally onto Janie's clothing and survived the washing process. Tracking down old photos of Dunlap also proved difficult. The Tennessee Department of Corrections provided detectives with 2 mugshots of Dunlap taken right before he was paroled. Prosecutors said when the detectives compared the photos with the 1979 composite sketch, the resemblance was clear. 2 of the 4 witnesses who saw Janie the day she disappeared were still alive and were able to help with a photo lineup. Both witnesses picked the photo of Dunlap out of the 5 other similar-looking men. Although they weren't 100% certain, they noted that he looked like a man they saw talking to Janie before she went missing. It is of note that the facility was very large and consisted of 700,000 square feet of buildings. And therefore, I'm sure since he worked in laundry, not many employees were familiar with him. Dunlap's former co-workers recalled that he would often leave work early, lord or near the bus stop near Fairview, and offer patients rides. Dunlap's widow and stepson said he drove a car similar to the one seen by witnesses the day Janie was killed. His stepson also said he and Dunlap hiked in the Silver Creek Falls area where the body was found. In 2017, after 38 years, the case was solved and Detective Hinkle returned Janie's belongings to her family, an earring and 2 small hair ties. Janet Stalkop was a 19-year-old nursing student at Cypress Junior College and worked part-time in the kitchen at UCI Medical Center when her life was cut short. Janet's sister, Lee, described her sister as someone with a genuine desire to help others, and she kept a small, close-knit group of friends. She was an avid reader and a fan of the Carpenters and Jim Croce. When she wasn't working, she loved to socialize with friends, read, and listen to music. Janet was last seen leaving her home to go to a coworker's Christmas party in Santa Ana on December 19, 1976, but she never made it and was reported missing the next day. 8 days later, she was found deceased in her 1962 Ford Falcon. It was parked in the Franciscan Gardens apartment complex, just 2.5 miles from her home in Garden Grove, California. Just over 26 years later in 2002, investigators were able to create a DNA profile of her killer from evidence taken from the crime scene. At that time, they were unable to match the DNA to anyone in the Cody's database. Then in 2020, Garden Grove police urged prosecutors to use genetic genealogy to help match the DNA they had on file to a suspect using familial DNA. In 2021, advanced DNA techniques helped investigators identify Terry Dean Hawkins as Janet's killer. Terry was a 23-year-old mechanic with a long rap sheet who lived in Garden Grove where Janet's car had been found. He was also charged in the death of a 30-year-old woman in Laguna Hills in 1975, but the case was dismissed. On July 4, 1977, Terry was arrested in Newport Beach for disorderly conduct and other charges. Within 24 hours, he was found deceased in the Orange County Jail of an apparent overdose. For 45 years, investigators had searched for her killer, not knowing he had died only 6 months after her and was lying in the same cemetery as Janet at the Forest Lawn Memorial Cemetery in Cypress, California. On June 1, 2011, the Waller family's life took on turn. A woman named Jackie contacted her sister Cheryl, informing her that she was going to pick up her children from her ex-husband Clay. Jackie planned to return home later that day. However, she never came back, nor did she make any further contact. Worried and unable to reach Jackie, Cheryl became increasingly anxious. By around 7 p.m., Cheryl decided to drive to the police station. Here, she made a startling statement, claimed that Clay Waller had killed her sister. The police officers found this accusation shocking, since Jackie had only called a few hours earlier, and there hadn't been any immediate cause for concern or reason to believe she was in danger at that time. Despite the unusual nature of Cheryl's assertion, it eventually became apparent that her instincts were correct. Jackie was indeed entangled in a troubling situation. So what exactly happened to Jackie? And why was Cheryl so convinced her sister had been murdered by her ex-husband even before Jackie was declared missing? Jackie was known for being sweet, kind, and caring. When she met Clay, there was an instant connection between them. Clay had a speech impediment that had subjected him to ridicule by others. This made him feel awkward and uncomfortable in social situations. However, unlike others, Jackie didn't ridicule him. Instead, she defended him and ensured he wasn't hurt by people's unkind remarks. Jackie's nature was all about protecting the vulnerable, fighting injustice, and helping everyone around her. It wasn't long before their bond grew stronger and they got married. At the time of their marriage, both were about 30 years old and aspired to have a large family. They bought a small house in Sanguine View, Missouri, where Jackie began creating a family nest. She had a successful career. Unfortunately, the same couldn't be said about Clay. His life consisted of numerous failures and he struggled with holding down any job for long periods. As a result, Jackie became the primary breadwinner of the family. She always dreamed of having children, but faced challenges in conceiving naturally. Determined to become a mother, though, she underwent fertility treatments, commonly referred to as ECO. So when Jackie discovered she was pregnant, with triplets no less, her joy knew no bounds. The family included 2 girls, Abai and Addison, plus 1 boy, Maddox. It was incredibly challenging for the woman to care for 3 children at once. Nonetheless, she did not complain. She continued to shoulder all responsibilities by herself without relying on her husband. He seemed uninterested in the children. At that time, took a job with the sheriff's office to support the family while his wife cared for the children. However, he didn't stay long. He was fired after a year. Only Jackie's parents and sister provided assistance with the children, allowing her some respite. When Clay lost his job, Jackie took on work to support the entire family. Even after their children were born, Clay did not change his behavior and showed little interest in either his family or work. Occasionally, he engaged in part-time work that didn't bring in the expected income. Clay seemed comfortable, living off his wife's hard work. She worked 40 hours a week and managed the household simultaneously. Jackie's career progressed rapidly. She soon secured a management position at an insurance company branch. This advancement further relaxed Clay's attitude toward financial responsibility. Instead of appreciating his wife's efforts, Clay mistreated her in various ways. He insulted her frequently, called her worthless, and demeaned her value by stating no one wanted her. His infidelities and abusive actions caused significant distress. Jackie's parents and sister were deeply troubled by Clay's behavior and urged her to divorce him. However, Jackie was reluctant to take such a drastic step at that time and tried to salvage their marriage. Every day brought diminishing hope that their relationship could be saved. Over the next few years, financial difficulties compounded their problems. Because Clay was not working while Jackie's salary could no longer cover all expenses for their large family. Mounting mortgage debts led to their house being foreclosed upon. The woman decided it was time to move in with sister, seizing upon the opportunity. Her husband then relocated to a friend's place. At this point, their children were a bit older. Jackie faced the tough, yet necessary choice to file for divorce. She believed she and her kids deserved a better life. When Jackie brought this up with her husband, Clay seemed calm initially. However, he soon changed his stance and refused the divorce. His threats started subtly, but gradually escalated into direct threats against her life. He warned that divorcing him would be like signing a death warrant for herself and their children. These threats terrified Jackie, yet she remained resolute. Living under such conditions was no longer an option for her, so she sought ways to end her marriage with Clay. She turned to her family, sharing the troubling behaviors of her husband, and began keeping a diary to document his actions. Jackie also noticed that Clay was stalking her. For the sake of safety, she and her children moved in with her sister during this period. Her kids were only 5 years old and didn't understand the situation fully. Nonetheless, Jackie explained that their current living arrangement was crucial. Time passed, and things began to stabilize as the divorce process neared its conclusion. It appeared that Clay had come to terms with their separation and ceased his harassment towards Jackie. They even started forming new relationships on the side. Jackie allowed Clay visitation rights with their children, and disputes between them reduced significantly. On June 1, 2011, Clay and Jackie agreed to meet at the attorney's office to finalize the last aspects of their divorce. On that day, their son Maddox was visiting his father while Jackie's other children stayed with Cheryl, Jackie's sister. After the meeting at the attorney's office, Jackie planned to pick up Maddox from Clay's house before heading back to Cheryl's place. Leaving the office, Jackie telephoned her sister Cheryl to report that everything had gone smoothly and mentioned she was on her way to collect Maddox from Clay's residence before returning home. That conversation would be their last. Jackie gradually lost touch. As time passed, her sister became increasingly anxious and started calling Jackie, but there was no answer. She then tried calling Clay, but he didn't respond either. Cheryl began to suspect that Clay had done something to Jackie. She sent him a text message. "If I don't hear from Jackie in 5 minutes, I'm going to the police." Almost immediately called back asking what was wrong. Cheryl responded firmly, stating that she believed he knew exactly what was happening. Clay asserted he didn't know where Jackie was and mentioned he would instruct her to call Cheryl when he saw her. However, Cheryl wasn't convinced. She took her sister's children to their parents at a house and filed a police report personally. Despite initial skepticism about Clay's involvement in Jackie's disappearance, the detectives took her concerns seriously. They didn't make her wait for 24 hours before investigating further. Instead, they pried to contact Jackie's ex-husband for any leads on her whereabouts. When questioned, 41-year-old Clay informed them that he had lunch with Jackie. They subsequently went to the attorney's office to discuss some aspects of their divorce, and then drove together to his house for further discussions. He claimed that after chatting for a while, he left for the store. Upon his return, Jackie's car was gone. He assumed she had departed. Clay added that his son, Maddox, was in Illinois with his new girlfriend at the time, and insisted Jackie was aware of it. According to him, Jackie wasn't there for her son, but merely to talk about other matters with Clay. However, Cheryl found his statements implausible and inconsistent with what she knew. Jackie made it known that her visit to Clay's house was solely for seeing her son. She had no intention of discussing anything else with him, especially given that she wouldn't have allowed her son to be far away with another woman. Noting these discrepancies, Cheryl managed to convince the investigators that Clay's account lacked credibility and suggested he might be concealing crucial information about Jackie's disappearance. In light of this new perspective provided by Cheryl, investigators were now treating the case more urgently as both the missing person and her car remained unaccounted for. A comprehensive search was launched for Jackie a few hours after her disappearance. Investigators her Honda Pilot on an interstate highway with a flat tire. There were no signs of an accident. The tire appeared punctured intentionally, making the scene look staged. The car was open and empty, with a few blood stains on the back seat, but no other clues indicating her whereabouts. These disturbing details hinted at a possible attack and kidnapping. The search effort for Jackie was concentrated in the vicinity where her car was found. Numerous volunteers, including police officers, rescue squads with dogs, and family members participated in the search. They came from various parts of the region responding to requests from Jackie's relatives. Despite the unbearable heat, many were willing to help locate her. Jackie's family announced a reward of $3,500 for information about her whereabouts. Despite their efforts, including extensive searches and public appeals for assistance, the search yielded no results for several days. Police began to scrutinize Clay, Jackie's ex-husband, more closely. When they visited his house to speak with him again, he recounted the same story as before, but refused access to his home and car. He promptly hired a lawyer who asserted his rights. For days after Jackie's disappearance, left her a voicemail with a distressed tone. "Hi honey, it's Sunday. You went missing on Wednesday. Please call me if you get this message. I don't know where you are and I miss you very much." Detectives later obtained a search warrant and returned to Clay's residence for a thorough inspection. During this inspection, they discovered blood-like stains in his vehicle. Forensic analysis revealed it was fish blood. Clay had deliberately coated the car with fish blood and recorded it on video as a test for forensic experts. In addition to examining the vehicle, investigators noted conspicuous details in Clay's house. A section of carpet had been removed from the floor, leaving an obvious mark. Tiny drops of blood were also found on the walls of the hallway leading to the basement. These findings raised further questions about Clay's involvement and intentions regarding Jackie's disappearance. Traces of furniture rearrangement were evident, signaling that something unusual was happening in the house. Forensics examined under the floorboards and discovered a bloody carpet. Blood samples from the house and the carpet were sent to the laboratory for further examination. Detectives tracked the missing woman's last known movements to 1:10 a.m. She was observed at a drugstore with her ex-husband. The pair appeared composed and normal. Approximately 2 hours later, she was seen at an ATM withdrawing money. After that, Jackie did not reappear on CCTV. Although Clay was seen a few hours later with his son and new girlfriend at a toy store. Subsequently, they visited a car wash in their pickup truck, which had a suspicious trash can inside. By then, had changed clothes and meticulously washed both the car and the boat. This increased suspicion around him, establishing him as the prime suspect. Investigators released photos of Clay's pickup truck and boat, requesting eyewitnesses who may have seen them. A young couple reported seeing Clay near Devil's Island on the Mississippi River. In response to this request, detectives confirmed this information through an analysis of Clay's cell phone billing records, prompting them to focus search efforts in that area. Despite numerous searches over the large terrain, nothing surfaced directly linking to the missing woman. The forensic results soon arrived, indicating that the drops of blood found in Clay's house indeed belonged to Jackie. The police then operated under the assumption that Jackie was deceased. Detectives called Clay in for questioning and attempted to procure a confession from him regarding Jackie's murder. However, Clay denied all accusations, stating that the blood stains were remnants of an old domestic incident in his kitchen. Without physical remains or definitive proof of death, investigators lacked grounds to arrest or charge him. Despite releasing him from custody, authorities kept Clay under close surveillance and continued their investigation. Being an ex-deputy sheriff himself, knew they were monitoring him closely and engaged in deceptive maneuvers to elude detection, effectively playing cat and mouse with law enforcement officials. He'd go to deserted vacant lots to mislead the investigation while the entire neighborhood stood by and participated in the search for the missing mother of 3. Clay continued to bully and taunt them. He would drive past the search party or Jackie's family, insult them, give them the middle finger and shout that they were wasting their time and wouldn't find anything. His defiant behavior raised more suspicions and questions. Meanwhile, the missing woman's sister Cheryl fought in court for custody of the triplets. She feared the children would go to a father who was a danger. His erratic behavior backfired on him and Cheryl got custody. This enraged him and he began threatening his ex-wife's sister with violence, including writing about it on social media. The woman recorded these threats and contacted police. Detectives seized the opportunity and arrested Clay nearly 5 months after Jackie's disappearance. He was charged with threats to life, which he accepted, but claimed he wrote out of anger and despair at losing custody of his beloved children. Clay insisted he didn't plan anything bad against Cheryl. He viewed himself as a victim in this situation. While investigating this incident with his sister, police found out he had other charges pending against him, stealing $50,000 from a previous employer as well as stalking a man. Detectives pressed his former coworker, hoping Clay would confess to killing his ex-wife and lead them to her body, but it was futile. Clayton continued to deny all charges regarding Jackie's disappearance. Instead of confessing to the crime, he started claiming confidently that he knew who was behind his ex-wife's death, a man named Harry. But detectives had already checked this lead thoroughly. Harry had an ironclad alibi that eliminated him from suspicion. All evidence pointed only to Clay, yet he kept denying it. He ended up going to prison for 5 years for threatening Cheryl. While the police locked him up in jail, they continued to investigate Jackie's disappearance. The search for the missing woman continued on Devil's Island, but never yielded any results. Eventually, about 2 years after Jackie's disappearance, the cops gathered a lot of circumstantial evidence: video camera footage, blood in his house, and more. They decided to charge Clay with his ex-wife's murder, even without her body. It was a risky and desperate move because if they lost, the prosecutor's office would not be able to charge him a second time. However, the prosecutor was determined. After consulting with his accomplices, Clay concluded that it would be best for them to make a deal with the prosecution to reduce the sentence. To do so, the defendant offered to plead guilty to the murder and provide the location of the body. Jackie's family agreed to this deal because it was important to give her a decent burial. Clay led police officers to his ex-wife's body. It was in a secluded spot on a remote sandbar on the Illinois side of the Mississippi River. At first, he couldn't remember exactly which tree he had buried her under, but then admitted that he had placed a bag of fertilizer on top of her body. One of the policemen, who was an active gardener, explained that large quantities of fertilizer kill trees. They looked around and found 3 dead trees that were of interest to them. They excavated there, and under one of the trees they did find Jackie's body wearing the same clothes she had last been seen in. The woman was identified from dental records as Jackie Waller. Finally, Jackie's loved ones recognized that she was definitely dead and found her body. Then they were able to commit her to the ground. The woman's funeral was held on her parents' golden wedding day. Cheryl told their children that their mom was gone and she had been killed. Father. This event was a great shock to the children because they lost both their mother and father at once. The children developed a deep aversion to Clay and refused to communicate with him henceforth. As part of the agreement, Clay had to officially confess to the murder of his ex-wife and provide specific details. He explained that the initial thoughts of murder began to surface about a year before the tragic event, when Jackie announced their separation. Despite this, he tried to suppress those dark thoughts, as Jackie was the mother of his children. However, he couldn't bear the idea of her taking his children away. He warned Jackie that such actions would have dire consequences for her, but she didn't heed his warning, which he considered her fault. The night prior to the murder, Clay traveled to a secluded area on Devil's Island to dig a grave for Jackie. According to him, their divorce proceedings were generally progressing smoothly. On that particular day, after a visit to their lawyer, they had a conversation in which she suggested they engage in intimacy one last time. They then went back to his home where they talked in the kitchen. While looking for a snack in the refrigerator, Clay accidentally raised his head, hitting Jackie and causing her nose to bleed. This incident angered her. She stormed out into the hallway where she smeared blood on the walls and started yelling at him that he would never see his children again. At this point, Clay lost control and attacked her. He hit her in the face with his hand and then strangled her. Subsequently, he took Jackie's body out in a dumpster and buried it in the pre-dug grave. Afterward, he meticulously cleaned out both the car and house, took a shower, changed clothes as if nothing happened, and then went on to meet his new girlfriend and son at a toy store. Throughout this process, claimed that everything was driven by impulse and emotion. He did not originally intend to kill Jackie. This contradicted his earlier statement, claiming he had dug the grave the day before. However, if Clay did not plan to kill the woman, why would he have dug the grave beforehand? It appeared to be premeditated murder. The medical examiner found multiple skull fractures on the deceased, indicating blunt force rather than a simple beating with fists. No one believed his story. Clay, who showed no remorse for killing his ex-wife, felt jubilant at receiving only 20 years in prison for second-degree murder, with the possibility of early release. The prosecutor had another strategy. Clay's testimony about digging the grave buried him further. He had dug the hole in Illinois while the murder occurred in Missouri. These actions fell under the federal law against domestic violence across state lines, and their violation allowed an additional 35 years to be added to his sentence. Clay Waller will be eligible for parole after serving 85% of his 55-year sentence. It turned out that Clay was unaware of such a law and did not foresee the consequences of his confession. Yet, his atrocities continued. Demonstrating further callousness, he wrote a book detailing Jackie's murder to profit from the tragedy. Sherelle, Jackie's sister, along with her husband, continues to raise Jackie's children with support from their elderly parents. The children have grown up remembering their mother as an exceptional person who remains forever in their hearts. They still harbor anger toward their father and deeply miss their mom. On December 2nd, 1990, a couple who were picking up cans along Oscar Talley Road near an abandoned farmhouse in McDonald County, Missouri stumbled upon a mystery. There was a decomposed body lying on the ground tied up with 6 different ropes, including a parachute cord. Upon discovering the remains, they immediately notified the police. A pathologist looked at the remains and estimated it to be a white female in her mid to late 20s. Her autopsy revealed that she had been sexually assaulted and murdered approximately 6 weeks prior to being found. The green parachute cord used on the woman was military issue sold to the military in the 1990s. After her remains were recovered, Detective Lori Howard sent them to get scanned, and the scans were sent to forensic artist Victoria Lywood in Canada. In 2009, her skeletal remains were sent to NAMUS and a profile was produced. However, it returned no matches in a Cody's search. A facial reconstruction expert was able to do a likeness of what she might have looked like using the MRI film of the skull. Those pictures were put out, and though there were several angles pursued, nothing transpired from those efforts. Detective Howard was told that it would be only by the grace of God that we could find out who she was. They would continue referring to her as Grace, and she became known as Neosho Grace Doe. The sheriff's office followed up on many leads over the years and used dental records and DNA to exclude possible matches from all over the country. In 2020, the McDonald County Sheriff's Office partnered with Othram to use advanced DNA testing and forensic genealogy to establish an identification of the victim or to find her closest living relatives. Funds to support the case were raised on the DNA Solves crowdfunding platform and also came from the University Foundation at the Southeast Missouri State University. Her DNA was degraded and had bacterial contamination, and so Othram cleaned up the DNA and created a genetic profile that could then be run through several genealogy websites. From there, they found a number of third cousin matches and started building up a family tree to find a common ancestor. Working down the family tree, they began to develop a theory about who she might have been related to and gave the names to the lead investigator. That is when investigators made contact with Danielle Pixler, who was on the genealogical tree developed by Othram. During the conversation, Danielle stated that she had a half-sister, Shauna Garber, that had been in foster care in Garnett, Kansas, and then went back into state care. Danielle did not know what happened to Shauna after she left foster care. Danielle stated that she had been looking for Shauna for over 28 years. In February 2021, Danielle agreed to give a DNA sample, and several weeks later, on March 29th, the results showed that she was a half-sister of Grace Doe. This led to the Neosho Grace Doe getting her real name, Shauna Beth Garber, born March 1st, 1968. She was 22 years old when she was murdered. Her brother Rob described his and Shauna's childhood by saying they were both physically abused by their mother. By the time Rob was 7 and Shauna was 5, the abuse from their mother began to escalate, which led to them being placed in foster care after a particular heinous incident. He was at school when their mother poured lighter fuel on Shauna and set her on fire. They were then split up after being taken into care with different families, and he was given the surname Ringwald. He saw his sister one more time after she got out of the hospital on his 8th birthday, and that was the last time. As an adult in the 1990s, Rob became interested in finding his sister. He remembered Shauna, but he was also told of other half-siblings. After contacting the authorities, he was eventually given the name of a half-sister, Danielle Pixler, who also lived in Kansas. They met and struck up a lasting friendship, and Danielle too wanted to find Shauna. She spent countless hours on Facebook hunting for her, and for years she put flyers on trees and windows. Detectives believe that Shauna was probably killed on Halloween night based on the report of a witness who said that she heard a woman scream and then heard a noisy pickup truck. Now investigators are attempting to trace the whereabouts of Shauna, her acquaintances once she became an adult, and what might have happened to her. They believe she may have been based in Joplin, Missouri at the time of her disappearance. Detective Lieutenant Hall thinks he has a real chance of breaking the case. He states, "Do think the murder can be solved now that we know who she is. It is possible that Shauna's killer is still alive and believes they have gotten away with murder. Danielle and Rob and other loved ones had a funeral for Shauna. They still don't have a picture of Shauna as an adult, and they still aren't sure what name she was using at the time of her death. But they finally have some answers and are closer to finally getting some closure. If you have any information regarding Shauna Garber, 22 years old, in late 1990, or anyone who might have known her, contact Lieutenant Michael Hall at the McDonald County Sheriff's Office in Pineville, Missouri. On June 1, 1989, 14-year-old Stephanie Isaacson left her house at about 6:30 a.m. to walk to El Dorado High School in Las Vegas, Nevada. She cut through a vacant sandlot at Stewart Avenue and Lynn Lane, which was her usual route. However, her shortcut was not a good idea that day. When Stephanie didn't come home that afternoon, her father started looking for her and soon found out she had never even arrived at school that day. A missing person report was filed and law enforcement investigators began a local search. That evening, near the intersection of Stewart Avenue and Nellis Boulevard, her books, belongings, and body were discovered nearby. Officers attempted to find leads but were unsuccessful. DNA from the case was uploaded to the national database called CODIS, but there were no matches. For 32 years, the case remained cold despite failed attempts at matching the DNA found on her shirt. In 2021, the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department teamed up with Othram to re-examine DNA evidence from the crime scene in hopes that advanced DNA testing might generate new leads in the investigation. The $5,000 needed to fund the testing was provided by entrepreneur and philanthropist Justin Wu, founder of the nonprofit organization Vegas Helps. He offered to donate to any case in the area, and Stephanie's case was chosen due to the limited DNA left. But Mr. Wu was not told which case he was funding until the results came in 7 months later. There was only 0.12 nanograms or fewer than 15 human cells of DNA remaining from the crime scene. But amazingly, the scientists at Althorn were successfully able to use the smallest ever amount of human DNA to crack a case. For reference, getting a DNA swab for companies like 23andMe gathered around 750 to 1,000 nanograms of DNA compared to the 0.12 nanograms they had in this case. This sets a new lower limit on the quantity of DNA required to build a genealogical profile for a suspect of a crime. Through a distant cousin, they were able to finally make a match. Detectives were able to confirm the identity of the suspect that attacked and strangled Stephanie as Darren Roy Marchand. He lived in Las Vegas at the time of the murder 32 years ago. In 1986, at the age of 20, he had also been a suspect in the murder of 24-year-old Nanette Vanberg of Las Vegas, and his DNA was still on record. Nanette was found dead in her home on February 27, 1986. However, he was released when the case was dismissed over a lack of evidence. 29-year-old Darren, her alleged killer, died in 1995 by suicide. If you are interested in helping solve a cold case, visit DNAsolves.com to learn how. Donations are required in many cases to help fund testing to solve cold cases. You can even choose which cold case you would like to fund, including helping discover the identity of John and Jane Does. Jamie Hahn was born on October 25, 1983. Growing up in Orangeburg, South Carolina, she lived with her 2 brothers and sister, Brett, Justin, and Ashley. Despite their parents' divorce and remarriage, Jamie remained a cheerful child. She attended a small yet renowned private prep school, celebrated for its educational excellence. In junior high, Jamie visited the University of North Carolina with her classmates. She instantly fell in love with the campus and aspired to attend. Even as a student, she aimed to impact others' lives by joining the board of the Center of Hope to support troubled teens. Later on, engaged in various political campaigns. One notable campaign was Senator John Edwards' 2008 presidential run, a competitor to Obama. During this campaign, Jamie emerged as a prominent figure in North Carolina's Democratic Party. During one campaign, she met Nation and formed a deep professional relationship with him that later evolved from platonic to romantic. For months after their first romantic moment, they announced their engagement and married on April 18, 2009. Their intense love was anchored in a deep friendship. Jamie and Nation thrived in their respective careers. Jamie ran her own political fundraising consulting firm, while Nation was a well-known online strategist aiding politicians and nonprofits with their campaigns. Described by friends and acquaintances as exceptionally kind, tender, and generous, the couple was well regarded. They took their marriage vows seriously and actively participated in projects like the Coalition to Protect Young Families in North Carolina. Although they were childless at that time, Jamie and Nation planned on starting a family soon. They both enjoyed vibrant social lives. Jamie was known among her friends and family as a compassionate individual who had the ability to spread happiness wherever she went. Her talent and enthusiasm for politics led many to foresee a promising future for her. However, unexpectedly, their seemingly perfect world suddenly fell apart on April 22, 2013. Around 5:20 p.m., Jamie frantically ran from her house and sprinted a few dozen meters before collapsing unconscious in a neighbor's yard. Her body was drenched in blood. Onlookers on the street were shocked by the scene and shouted for someone to call 911. A neighbor, who saw the turmoil unfolding in his yard, immediately phoned emergency services. Through Jermaine's disoriented words, he understood that someone named John, who seemed to still be inside her house, had assaulted her with a knife. He quickly applied a towel to the numerous wounds on her abdomen and urgently summoned an ambulance and the police. Arriving patrol officers traced the blood from the neighbor's yard back to the Hahn residence. Encircling the house, they commanded the individual inside to exit with hands raised. Moments later, a disheveled bald man emerged on the porch. The officers noted he bore wrist injuries and a stab wound in his abdomen. Due to his injuries, this unidentified man was transported to the hospital in an ambulance, escorted by a police officer. En route to the hospital, the wounded man grew distressed and tearful, expressing regret that this hadn't occurred sooner, and repeatedly murmuring a desire to die. Following his medical treatment, the police endeavored to ascertain his identity, reasons for being in the Hahn residence, and circumstances leading to this tragic event. They soon discovered he was 31-year-old Jonathan Wayne Brill, a close friend of Nation and a guest in their home. Jermaine also knew John well. She had employed him as an accountant in her political consulting firm after he relocated to North Carolina. The couple had generously offered him accommodation in their home until he could find his own place. Nation and John hailed from the same hometown and first crossed paths in 2000 during a church trip. Despite a 4-year age gap, they quickly struck up a friendship. As it often happens with childhood friends, they drifted apart when one went off to college, but rekindled their bond post-graduation. They became virtually inseparable. Jonathan even had the honor of being the best man at Nation and Jermaine's wedding. In April 2009, the trio was akin to the Three Musketeers, following the ethos of one for all and all for one. They shared vacations, regular Monday dinners, and celebrated holidays together. To some neighbors, Jonathan seemed almost like an extension of the Hahn family, given how much time he spent at their home. This deep, seemingly unbreakable bond makes the violent incident that left all three with stab wounds in their own home all the more perplexing and tragic. Every Monday, Jamie and Nation would host their mutual friend Jonathan for dinner. On that particular day, Broyhill arrived earlier than usual with the intention of discussing recent campaign details with Jamie. The friends were deeply concerned about John's well-being, as he had confided in them about his diagnosis of pancreatic cancer, a notably aggressive and often terminal disease. The Hahns, in their caring nature, accompanied Jonathan to his medical appointments and were consistently present, offering every possible support in his arduous battle for life. There was an instance when Jamie, overwhelmed with emotion, asked Nation if they should consider having a child soon, so that their future offspring might have the chance to know Jonathan. Such was their affection and regard for their friend. They wished even their yet-to-be-born child could have the opportunity to bond with him. The recent diagnosis of cancer was a harsh blow, but it wasn't the first health challenge Brill had encountered. Over the years, John had experienced multiple hospitalizations. He had once revealed to Nation that he was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis during a gallbladder operation. Consequently, the Hahns invited Jonathan to live with them temporarily, offering care and support until his health improved. On that fateful Monday, Jamie and Jonathan were already engaged in work-related discussions in the kitchen when Nation arrived home and headed upstairs to change. Nation was startled by Jamie's screams calling out his and then John's name. Assuming that Brill may have fallen ill given his medical condition, Nation hurried downstairs midway. He was met with Jamine's terror-stricken voice, crying out that someone was trying to stab her. Rushing into the kitchen, Nation was confronted with the horrifying sight of his wife on the floor, bleeding profusely. John stood over her, wielding a large kitchen knife. As Brill and started advancing towards Nation, knife raised threateningly. Nation froze in disbelief. How could such a nightmare unfold in mere minutes? In a desperate act of self-defense, Nation grabbed the knife blade with one hand, while striking John in the face with his other hand. Amidst this chaos, he frantically urged Jamine to run for safety. Attempting to subdue a man who until moments ago was his closest friend seemed almost unreal. Despite her grave injuries, Jamine miraculously managed to rise from the floor and flee through the side door of their home. Once she was out, Nation, overcoming shock and tumult, pushed Jonathan aside and hurried after his wife. Outside, Jamine desperately made her way to the nearest neighbor's house for help. Unfortunately, no one responded to her urgent knocking. Summoning her remaining strength, she attempted to reach the next house, but collapsed unconscious in their yard due to her overwhelming injuries. Alerted by the commotion and drawn by the screams, passers-by quickly came to her assistance, while a neighbor called for an ambulance and the police. Meanwhile, Nation, panicked, searched frantically for Jamine. Following the trail of blood led him to discover her in a neighbor's yard. She was conscious but in agony, clutching her side. Kneeling beside her, he took her hand and tried comforting her with promises of recovery and future anniversaries and vacations by the sea, though tears streamed down his face. As he spoke, clutching Jamine's hand, Nation was overwhelmed by thoughts of a life without her and unable to fathom how their peaceful life had taken such a sudden turn. As they awaited help, a neighbor swiftly brought a towel to press against Jamine's bleeding abdomen. Unfortunately, the towel was quickly soaked with blood. Another compassionate neighbor elevated Jamine's legs onto a bag of leaves, trying to give some comfort. The ambulance was on its way, but to the onlookers, the wait felt endless. Even though it was only a few minutes, Jamine's breathing grew labored, a clear sign of her critical state. When the paramedics arrived, they promptly administered life-saving measures. Nation, having suffered severe cuts to his hand while wrestling with the knife, also desperately needed medical attention. Both he and Jamine were rushed to the hospital. During transport, Jamine lost consciousness and upon arrival was taken immediately for emergency surgery. Meanwhile, Nation, overwhelmed with worry for his wife and oblivious to his own pain, received stitches. He was in such shock that he repeatedly tried to enter the ICU, desperate for any updates about Jamine, but was denied access. Seated anxiously on a hospital bed, Nation was tormented by thoughts of Jamine's condition. Over a dozen stab wounds, a severed artery and severe liver damage. His only solace during those excruciating moments was hoping and praying for her survival. By some miracle, Jamine did survive the surgery initially, but tragically, this hope was short-lived. She never regained consciousness. 2 days after this harrowing ordeal, Jamine succumbed to her injuries. The autopsy revealed a grim reality. She had sustained 24 stab wounds across various parts of her body, including her face, neck, back, hands, and forearms. However, the most lethal injuries were inflicted on her abdomen and chest, resulting in catastrophic damage to her lungs and liver. Meanwhile, Jonathan Brill had inflicted wounds upon himself and was hospitalized for 8 days to recover from his self-inflicted injuries. On Tuesday, April 30th, 2013, still needing medical attention with bandages on both wrists, Brill was transported on a stretcher to the magistrate's office in Wake County. The individual was formally charged with first-degree murder in the case Jermaine Hahn and assault with a deadly weapon on Nation Hahn. Due to the severity of the charges, he was held without bail and at Central Prison in Raleigh. This facility was specifically chosen because it housed a hospital wing, ensuring that Bryhill would continue to receive the necessary medical treatment while in custody for his crimes. The tragic and sudden loss of Jameen profoundly impacted many, leaving a lingering question. Why would someone she considered a best friend commit such a horrific act, robbing her of her future? In the wake of the tragedy, speculation swirled within the community about a substantial amount of money that had gone missing during the election campaign, managed by Jameen's team. Jonathan Brill, who had served as the accountant, officially ceased working for the company at the end of 2012. Despite this, he remained responsible for providing Jameen with financial details and assisting in the preparation of financial reports. It was suspected that Jameen might have discovered the missing funds, which totaled over $50,000, and confronted Jonathan about this discrepancy. This confrontation could have triggered his violent outburst. On April 22, 2013, Jameen had invited Jonathan over for their regular Monday dinner and intended to discuss the company's financial issues. The exact sequence of events during Nation's brief absence remains unclear. However, it is widely believed that Jameen might have challenged Jonathan regarding the missing funds during this time. As time passed, Nation's physical wounds began to heal, but emotional and psychological scars remained deep and unhealing. 6 months following this devastating event, Jameen's family and Nation, her grieving husband, scattered her ashes near Pulaski Memorial Baptist Church. This place was significant because Jameen had dedicated her time and efforts as a volunteer there. In a poignant twist of fate, just a week before the tragedy, the Hans had requested the church's pastor to pray for Jonathan, who they believed was battling cancer. Did they know that soon it would be they who needed the prayers of their community in the wake of such an unimaginable loss? The Nation had to grapple with the truth that an individual he had known from childhood, whom he saw as his dearest friend, had completely shattered his life, and even more heartbreakingly, claimed the life of the woman he adored more than anything in the world. According to Nation, Jameen was his anchor, his backbone, and his soulmate. He couldn't fathom how the sun could continue to glow without her. The trial of Brill commenced on March 4, 2015. The district attorney informed the jury that Jonathan, serving as Jenny's financial manager, had written 39 checks to himself, misappropriating around $50,000, the identical sum missing from the account. To rationalize his deeds, Brill claimed various health issues, including brain impairment from multiple sclerosis, memory deficits, a gallbladder operation, and pancreatic cancer. Compassionate Jamie refrained from confronting John about such a sensitive matter during his challenging times. She tactfully sidestepped the issue, hoping Brill would identify and rectify the mistake. All seemed normal until she got a call from a debt collector. Then the district attorney unveiled a startling truth. The preceding year, the defendant's first hospitalization occurred when he was admitted following an episode at Hans' residence. Prior to that, Jonathan hadn't sought any medical treatment, as his health records confirmed. All along he had deceived Jamie and Nation about his health conditions. No gallbladder operation, no multiple sclerosis, and no cancer, but merely a manifest mental disorder and something dreadful. Within the search history revealed that the man had been seeking information on pancreatic cancer and specialists in this particular field, evidently to lend credibility to his falsehoods. He also looked up cruises that could be taken without a passport. John had arranged a one-way journey to Las Vegas for April 23rd, but canceled it on the 22nd, merely 2 hours before assaulting Jamie with a knife. Jonathan admitted to the authorities that he had indeed misappropriated the campaign funds and fabricated all his medical conditions. When the Hans escorted him to medical appointments, waiting in the car as devoted, caring friends, he merely roamed the hospital halls. In recent times, Jonathan grappled with depression and suicidal inclinations. He confessed to being tormented by voices urging him to harm others. He purchased the knife for himself, supposedly planning to use it in Vegas to end his life. Yet, he believed Jameen would confront him about the financial irregularities. When she did, he began to inflict wounds on himself. Jameen attempted to intervene, but at that point, he was so deranged and furious that he started assaulting his friend impulsively. Jonathan recalled attacking Jamie, yet parts of this episode were wiped from his memory. His lawyer and Jonathan himself realized that fully dismissing the charges was unfeasible due to the overwhelming evidence of his guilt. Still, they aimed to argue for temporary insanity to lessen the sentence. Before the jury retired to deliberate, Nation Han was allowed to speak. With a voice filled with sorrow, he expressed, "We lock our doors at night to block out the world's evil, but it's chilling to think what occurs when evil holds the key." He addressed these words to his former best friend. On March 19, 2015, the jury announced their decision. They ruled Jonathan Brill guilty of first-degree murder of Jamie Han and the attempted murder of Nation Han. The judge issued a life sentence without parole. Jamin's intentions were utterly pure, and her death was so senseless that even Jonathan later acknowledged in an interview that if he had been honest with the Hans, she would have forgiven him. Suddenly, their closest friend became their worst fear. This story defies any rational explanation. Mikhail Bush was born on February 13, 1997 in the Canadian province of Alberta. She grew up there with her parents and a younger sister, who was not only incredibly close to her, but also saw her as a role model throughout their lives. Mikhail was a cheerful, energetic, and kind girl, which naturally drew people to her and earned her many friends. One of her biggest passions in life was ice skating. From a young age, she and her parents would often visit local rinks, and over time, it became something she truly loved. While in high school, Mikhail met a boy named Cody, and the two began dating. It didn't take long for them to realize they wanted to spend the rest of their lives together. So, after graduation, they started planning their future as a couple. After finishing school, Mikhail got a job at a charity organization that supported people with disabilities. She quickly grew passionate about the work and decided to pursue a career in healthcare so she could continue helping those in need. In 2017, Mikhail enrolled in a local college and earned her nursing degree. After graduating, she returned to her job at the charity center. But shortly after that, something else happened. Mikhail found out she was pregnant. She and Cody were over the moon with joy, and following the happy news, Cody proposed to her in the middle of a ring. In 2020, they welcomed their son Noah and began building their life together as a family. Cody worked in pipeline construction, which meant he was constantly traveling across Canada. It was quite tough. His wife and newborn either had to move around with him or spend weeks without seeing him. But in 2021, he got a new job that finally let him stay in one place. With this new job, the family moved to a small town called Hinton. It was a fairly remote area, but for the first time, Cody's work no longer required constant travel, and they could finally settle down and spend more time together. In early September 2021, Mikhail and Cody moved into their new apartment in a residential complex on the outskirts of town. At the time, Mikhail was 24 years old, and their son Noah was just 16 months. The family was thrilled with their new home, surrounded by nature, parks, and a sense of peace and quiet. On September 16th, Cody left for work as usual, while Mikhail stayed home to take care of their son. His shift ended around 6 p.m. and he headed back, looking forward to spending the evening with his family. But to his surprise, neither Mikhail nor Noah was home. Cody checked every room, looked out into the yard, but there was no sign of them. At first, he thought Michael might have taken Noah for a walk to one of the nearby parks, but then he noticed something odd. Their son's stroller was still inside the apartment, which meant Michael couldn't have gone far with him. Then Cody noticed something even more unsettling. On the kitchen table, there were plates with half-prepared food, as if Michael had started making lunch, but suddenly stopped and left the house. Cody started to seriously worry and decided to check the nearby parks and playgrounds, thinking Mikhail and Noah might be there. But after searching everywhere, he couldn't find them and returned home. Hoping for answers, he began calling family and friends, thinking someone might have picked them up. That would have explained why Mikhail hadn't taken the stroller, but no one had seen her that day. On top of that, Cody kept trying to call her, but Mikhail wasn't answering her phone. The whole situation felt increasingly bizarre, and Cody decided it was time to call the police. By the time he made the call, one of his friends had arrived at the apartment complex to help. Together they searched the area again before the police arrived but couldn't find them. It seemed like Mikhail had vanished without a trace. The officers arrived shortly after and joined the search. They thoroughly checked the apartment complex, the wooded area behind it, and nearby streets. They also began going door to door, questioning residents in hopes of finding any clues about Mikhail and Noah's whereabouts. Before long, their efforts paid off. One neighbor mentioned seeing a woman who looked like Mikhail running away from the complex toward the road earlier that day. She wasn't screaming or calling for help, and her son wasn't with her. The police decided to follow up on this lead and asked the complex manager for access to the CCTV footage. They reviewed hours of recordings but couldn't find any sign of Mikhail. But then something completely unexpected caught their attention. Around noon, the same neighbor who claimed to have seen Mikhail was captured on camera carrying 2 large garbage bags out of the building. The police went straight to the dumpster to examine the contents of those bags. When they opened one, they were met with a horrifying sight. Inside was Noah's body, along with some of Mikhail's belongings, including her phone. This discovery immediately changed the course of the investigation. Detectives knew they had to proceed carefully, as Mikhail's whereabouts were still unknown. They suspected the neighbor was directly involved in the crime and decided to search his apartment. But there was a problem. The man lived right next door to Mikhail's apartment, where Cody and other family members were waiting. The 2 apartments shared a wall. The police were concerned that what they might find inside the neighbor's apartment could trigger an uncontrollable situation. To avoid this scenario, the officers came up with a plan. They asked Cody and his family members to temporarily leave their apartment, explaining that investigators needed to conduct a thorough examination. What they didn't tell Cody was that his son's body had just been discovered only a few dozen yards away. As soon as Cody left, police went straight to the neighbor's apartment. They requested permission to search the unit, and the man voluntarily agreed. When investigators reached the bathroom, they found Mikhail. Her body was lying in the tub, completely unclothed. After this heartbreaking discovery, the neighbor, 53-year-old Robert Major, was immediately arrested, and detectives now had to piece together what had happened inside that apartment. While waiting for medical examiners to determine the exact causes of death, the police began looking into Robert's background, and what they found was truly shocking. Robert had an extensive criminal record spanning several decades. He had been charged more than 24 times, mostly for sexual offenses. But despite his repeated arrests, Robert had only served short prison sentences. During his time in custody, he was evaluated by multiple psychiatrists, and he openly admitted to them that he really enjoyed committing these acts and took pleasure in his crimes. With multiple expert evaluations on record, authorities knew for sure Robert was likely to reoffend, but instead of keeping him behind bars after his numerous crimes, he was released in 2016. The only measure the police took was to issue a public warning, informing the community about Robert and the threat he posed. Robert was also required to register in a special offender database. He was banned from living near women, children, schools, or playgrounds, prohibited from leaving his city, which was located about 190 miles from Hinton, and ordered to meet with a police representative on a regular basis. But these restrictions quickly became irrelevant. Canadian law basically removed individuals from the registry and lifted their restrictions if they went a year without committing another crime. Because of this, Robert fell off the radar of law enforcement several years before the tragedy. At some point, he moved to Hinton and settled in a residential complex filled with families and children. None of the local police officers were aware of his criminal history. The management of the apartment complex, even if they wanted to, had no way of accessing this information, let alone the residents themselves. Medical experts soon completed their examination of the bodies, while Robert, shortly after his arrest, gave a partial confession, and his words shocked even the most seasoned investigators. On top of that, they managed to gather additional evidence and witness statements that helped piece together the full picture of what happened on that fateful day. That morning, Mikhail and Noah went for a walk in the nearby park. When they returned home, the building manager approached Mikhail to discuss an issue. The problem was that Cody worked on pipelines, would often come home with his boots and clothes covered in dirt, leaving muddy tracks all the way to their apartment door. The manager asked Mikhail to address the situation and she promised to clean it up right away. After their conversation, Mikhail went back inside, put Noah down for a nap, and started preparing lunch. Around this time, she also called a friend. This friend later recalled hearing a knock at Mikhail's door during their conversation, followed by a man's voice. He offered to help clean the hallway, but the friend didn't catch the rest of the exchange. Shortly after, Mikhail returned to the kitchen, finished her call, and sent a message to a family member around 2 p.m. From there, one critical question remained unanswered for investigators. How did Mikhail end up in Robert's apartment? Robert himself refused to clarify this particular moment, leaving police to speculate. Perhaps he lured her there under some pretense. Maybe by continuing the conversation about cleaning the hallway or asking for her help with something else. One way or another, Mikhail ended up inside Robert's apartment, and this is where his confession began. Almost immediately after she walked through the door, he attacked her and tried to strangle her, but for nearly 10 minutes he struggled to succeed. In the end, he managed to kill her and then essay her. He then dragged her body to the bathroom before heading to her apartment, where he took Noah and ended his life as well. After committing these horrific acts, Robert placed Noah's body, along with Michael's clothes and belongings, into garbage bags and dumped them in a container outside the building. It seemed he had no further plan, as Michael's body was simply left in the bathroom. Although he tried to mislead investigators by claiming that Michael had run off from the complex, possibly hoping that police wouldn't think to look inside his apartment. As for his motives, they remain unclear. The details of the case, including the full account of his confession, were never made fully public. Investigators shared only bits of information with media, leaving room for speculation. The reason behind Mikhail's murder was relatively straightforward. Not only did Robert find satisfaction in causing harm, but he also killed her with the intent of essay. However, Noah's murder was more perplexing. Investigators suggested that Robert may have killed him out of fear that Noah could identify him. Another theory is that Noah woke up and started crying, which may have scared Robert, thinking the noise could draw attention from the neighbors. One way or another, Robert's main motive became crystal clear through his numerous conversations with psychiatrists. He simply took genuine pleasure in harming others, especially those who were physically weaker than him. It's worth noting that even prison didn't stop him. During one of his previous sentences, Robert assaulted a cellmate, which led to additional charges. With news of this case spread across the country, many were horrified, not only by the brutality of the crime, but also by the fact that such a dangerous man had been allowed to live freely. Public outrage grew even stronger when details of what happened during the trial came to light. But more on that later. Robert openly admitted to psychiatrists that he enjoyed committing such crimes, and all of them agreed there was very high likelihood he would do it again. But despite this, he was released back into society and eventually authorities stopped monitoring him altogether. The residents of that complex had no way of knowing about his criminal past either. Even if he had remained on a sex offender registry, the system in Canada works very differently than in the US. In Canada, only law enforcement officials can access the registry, not the general public. This left many Canadians outraged as the laws prioritized protecting the privacy of a predator but failed to protect Michael and her son. The family had moved into that complex just 15 days before the tragedy, only to become victims of a man who lived literally next door. This devastating injustice pushed Cody and the rest of the family to fight for change. They became actively involved in drafting a new piece of legislation named in Noah's memory. The main goal of the bill was to ensure that repeat offenders are monitored for their entire lives, not just for a short period after their release. The bill also proposed creating a public registry of these offenders, so anyone could easily check if someone with a criminal past was living in their area. As for Robert, he didn't deny his guilt, so the trial moved pretty quickly, but before sentencing, his final statement shocked everyone and once again raised the question of why someone like him was ever released. He openly admitted that he should remain in prison for the rest of his life, because even he would fear what he might do if he were ever free again. At the same time, he claimed he still saw himself as a good person, despite everything he had done. In the end, Robert was sentenced to life in prison, but there was a catch. he would still be eligible for parole in 25 years. If he lives that long, he'll be 78 years old, and there's no guarantee he wouldn't still pose a threat to others, even at that age. As for the bill the victim's family is fighting for, progress has been frustratingly slow. Despite years of advocacy, the legislation still hasn't been passed, and it's unclear if it ever will be. Luz Maria Lopez was born on March 17, 1995, in the small town of San Cristobal, Verapaz. Her family was simple and modest. Her parents were R. Morales and Brian Lopez. Luz Maria was the youngest of 2 children. She grew up with her older brother, Omar. As an infant, she faced a life-threatening intestinal obstruction. To save her, doctors performed a complex operation without guarantees of success. Her mother prayed fervently for her recovery and firmly believed that her daughter would pull through, and she did. The surgery at such an early age did not impact Luz Maria's development. Throughout her school years, Luz Maria actively engaged in sports, especially gymnastics and athletics. She also had a passion for classical choreography. Her creative nature made it easy for her to communicate and connect with different people, quickly forming friendships. Academically inclined towards the humanities, she excelled in her studies. After finishing school, Luz Maria contemplated higher education and opted for a prestigious state university. She decided to pursue a law degree and later specialized in criminalistics due to her genuine interest in this field. A significant moment occurred during her student years when Luz Maria and her mother visited a car dealership in Coban, the capital of Alta Verapaz. It was Omar's 25th birthday that year, and they wanted to gift him something special, a motorcycle he had always dreamed of. At the showroom, a polite and attentive young consultant named Jorge welcomed them. He showed them various models and provided recommendations. Mother and daughter chose a model but wanted to consult with the head of the family before finalizing their decision. They left with a business card from the dealership and Luz Maria's phone number for future reference. Soon after, Jorge called Luz Maria, not about the motorcycle but on a more personal note. Over time, these calls became frequent until Jorge mustered the courage to ask her out for coffee. It was clear that he had a strong attraction to the beautiful, sultry brunette, but he was unsure how to initiate their acquaintance. Luz Maria also found this handsome young man appealing. When he proposed they meet, she agreed readily. Although the young man was a year younger than her, this slight difference didn't hinder their growing connection. Their romantic relationship blossomed almost immediately. Both felt it was love at first sight and believed in a future filled with happiness together. After only a few months, the couple chose to live together despite their parents' disapproval of such haste. Soon after, they were married. Approximately 6 months later, they held a wedding ceremony inviting only their closest friends and family to celebrate with them. However, issues arose on the day of the wedding. The banquet venue encountered a problem which almost disrupted the entire event. The couple had to pay a significant additional amount to ensure the celebration proceeded as planned. Little is known about Jorge, Luz Maria's chosen partner. Born in 1996 in Santa Catalina, Latina, in central Guatemala, Jorge was the eldest of 2 sons and grew up with his brother Pablo. Their family often faced financial hardships, balancing on the edge of poverty. Thus, there wasn't enough money for luxurious clothes or expensive toys. It barely covered necessities. Despite these challenges, Shohei lacked aspirations for a better life and didn't focus on studying or securing a decent job. People who knew Shohei personally described him as withdrawn and sometimes even aggressive due to his trouble controlling emotions. Consequently, he didn't have many friends and struggled with relationships. Nonetheless, meeting his dream girl sparked determination within him. He worked hard to win her love and hurried to marry her out of fear she might change her mind. It's worth mentioning that Luz Maria's parents were skeptical about their son-in-law right from the beginning. Overall, despite some initial challenges and doubts from others around them, their connection remained strong and unwavering. Something about this young man didn't sit right with them. They couldn't pinpoint it, and they couldn't convince their daughter not to marry him. Soon after the wedding, she became pregnant. Without a university degree, finding a good job was tough. Employers didn't want to hire someone inexperienced and expecting a baby, so she had to settle odd jobs. Her husband, by that time, had lost his job too, and wasn't eager to find a new one. When their daughter Alice was born, money became really tight. With both of them unemployed, they struggled to pay rent or even buy food and basic necessities. Then Jorge suggested moving in with his parents temporarily. Luz Maria Lopez resisted for a long while, but eventually agreed. They couldn't stay on the streets with a baby. Luz Maria Lopez's mother was aware of her daughter's family issues and often urged her to come back home. But Luz Maria Lopez kept saying things would get better with her husband and there was no need to worry. One day, the mother decided to visit her daughter and granddaughter at her son-in-law's parents' house and found a distressing scene. Luz Maria Lopez was in terrible shape, eating just once a day and that too very little. However, Shore's family didn't see the need to provide for their unemployed daughter-in-law. It's terrible. Luz Maria Lopez was breastfeeding Alice, so lack of proper nutrition threatened both their healths. But inadequate meals were only part of the myriad problems she faced in her mother-in-law's home, as she later discovered. She was constantly humiliated and even beaten by her husband's younger brother. He was irritated by the crying of the child and the presence of items in the house. His frustration him to repeatedly throw these items at Maria. On one occasion, he launched a baby bottle that struck little Alice, who was in her mother's arms. Jorge witnessed all of this, but never once stood up for his wife and daughter, acting as if they were strangers to him. Maria's mother persuaded her to take her granddaughter and return to the parents' house. Soon after, Shorai appeared at their doorstep, asking his wife to come back, promising he would find employment. She agreed, but only on the condition that they would rent an apartment and live separately from Shorai's parents. When Maria successfully defended her diploma, she fulfilled a long-time dream by securing a job with the city prosecutor's office. A smart, talented, and responsible young woman, she quickly earned the respect of her colleagues and began moving up the career ladder. Over time, the family's financial situation improved considerably. They could even afford to buy a car for two. However, this improvement was solely due to Maria's diligent work and reputation. Zohei was still searching for himself and preferred living at his wife's expense. He was jealous, lazy, and a domestic type with an explosive temper, which worsened over time. Zohei did not want to work, taking only temporary part-time jobs, if at all. He preferred sitting at home in front of the TV, drinking beer with friends, and spending what his wife earned. Moreover, Jorge was pathologically jealous and tried to control every move of his beloved. He did not permit her to make friends or have lunch with colleagues in cafes or just be somewhere without him. Constantly checking her phone records and reading messages became routine for him. He also forbade her from registering accounts on social networks. At home, when left alone with Maria, Jorge's behavior did not improve in any way. He often created scandals in seemingly calm places, constantly clarified his relationships, and habitually blamed his wife for any problems or family troubles. When they lived at his parents' house, Jorge never stood up for his wife. He just watched as she was humiliated, insulted, and occasionally even beaten by his relatives. Jorge himself also sometimes resorted to violence and didn't see anything wrong with it. He treated Luz Maria as if she were his property, believing she would endure everything and wouldn't leave him. Neighbors frequently heard screams from their home and saw signs of beatings on the young woman's face and body. Luz Maria repeatedly tried to leave her husband and considered filing for divorce. Several times she took her daughter and moved out to live with her parents. However, each time her husband would go there, literally begging on his knees for forgiveness. Remarkably, each time Luz Maria forgave him and gave him another chance despite her parents urging her to come to her senses and leave the abusive man. On December 15, 2020, after another violent altercation with Jorge, Luz Maria took their 3-year-old daughter Alice, got into the car in tears, and went to her mother's house. The following day, Jorge arrived there. His intentions were unclear, whether he wanted his wife back or simply the car. He claimed he had found a job and assured everyone that their lives would change. Additionally, he promised never to raise a hand against his wife again. Surprisingly, Luz Maria believed him yet again and returned with him to their rented apartment. In mid-January 2021, Luz Maria called her mother to complain. But not only did Jorge fail to secure a job as promised, but had also stolen the money she earned, effectively leaving the family destitute. Her mother felt sorry for her daughter and offered financial help so they could get by until the next salary was received. The women agreed to meet on the morning of January 19th, but Luz Maria did not arrive at the designated time. She decided to visit her daughter's workplace the next day. Upon arrival, she discovered that Luz Maria Lopez hadn't shown up for 2 days, and no one had been able to contact her. At the same time, Jorge, also searching for his wife, appeared at the prosecutor's office. He mentioned that they had argued again and thought Luz Maria Lopez had gone to her mother's house. He figured she wasn't answering because she was upset with him. The concerned mother immediately felt something was wrong and suspected her son-in-law might be lying. She went straight to the police to initiate a search for Luz Maria Lopez without delay. That same day, an alert system named Isabel Claudina, originally Alert to Isabel Claudina, was activated nationwide. This emergency system was triggered for young women reported missing. When the extensive search began, Luz Maria Lopez's husband was quickly identified as the prime suspect, though it would actually be more accurate to say he was the only suspect. Luz Maria Lopez had no known enemies or reasons someone would kidnap her, and Jorge was the last person seen with her alive. Naturally, he denied any involvement in her disappearance, asserting that he himself was distraught over her absence and irritated by being labeled as the main suspect. Despite his denials, Jorge repeatedly contradicted himself during questioning and failed to provide a clear explanation as to why he hadn't informed the police on the actual day of his wife's disappearance. He claimed he believed she was at his mother-in-law's home, but didn't call or visit there. While law enforcement searched for witnesses and combed through areas for any clues, a breakthrough came on January 22nd. Municipal workers accidentally discovered Luz Maria Lopez's body while responding to a call about a clogged storm drain near a road. Upon lifting the grate to access the drain, they found an unusual large plastic bag containing something black inside. Upon closer inspection, the observers were horrified to discover charred human remains. They promptly reported this gruesome finding to the authorities. Upon arrival, the police officers speculated that the body might belong to Luz Maria Lopez, who was widely looking for her after nationwide. Forensic experts later verified that the remains were indeed those of a young woman. Her parents and brother, despite the severe disfigurement caused by the fire, confirmed her identity with certainty. What's coincident is that the package containing her remains was found on the same street as the prosecutor's office where she had worked. This location lacked surveillance cameras and lighting. Despite how badly burned the body was, pathologists determined that she had been severely beaten before death. The cause of death was asphyxia, indicated by internal hemorrhages, multiple fractures sustained while she was still alive, and particles of dried blood in her nose and mouth. Additionally, there were deep marks on her neck pointing to strangulation. At the time of discovery, no new suspects had emerged in the investigation. The victim's parents firmly believed that their son-in-law had brutally murdered their daughter. Consequently, Jorge was taken into custody while authorities examined his motive for committing such a heinous act. In addition to the investigation, psychologists and criminal analysts needed to scrutinize the marriage and family dynamics closely. During these proceedings, Ms. Lopez submitted a disturbing audio recording sent anonymously by a neighbor familiar with her daughter's household. This person had frequently witnessed domestic disputes between Luz Maria and her husband, but decided to record one such incident without realizing it would culminate in murder. The audio captured Luz Maria desperately crying for help amid little sobs in the background. Ms. Lopez was horrified by what she heard and lamented that if this witness had alerted authorities earlier, her daughter might still be alive today. The individual who captured the recording did not contact the police, nor did they visit the residence from which the distressing screams emanated. The authorities were unable to trace this anonymous person, making it impossible to involve them as a witness in the investigation. Consequently, the audio recording was included in the criminal materials. A A key witness gave a detailed interview urging all citizens to stay vigilant and report incidents of domestic violence to the police rather than merely documenting them with devices such as cameras. This approach, she stated, could potentially save lives. This crime triggered significant public outrage, steadily prompting thousands to take to the streets in protest, demanding that the perpetrator be brought to justice. Jorge was promptly taken into custody but persistently denied any wrongdoing. He claimed he personally drove his wife to work on that ill-fated day when she subsequently vanished. Street CCTV footage indeed captured their vehicle heading towards Luz Maria Lopez's workplace that morning. However, due to tinted windows, it was indiscernible how many individuals were inside. None of the video clips showed the car stopping or Luz Maria exiting. Further discoveries were uncovered at the couple's rented home, where faint traces of cleaned blood and drag marks were detected. These findings suggested that a violent crime likely occurred there. An additional piece of evidence came when microscopic fragments of burnt flesh were discovered in the trunk of their family car. Moreover, during their search, investigators paid close attention to a recent purchase made by Jorge and his wife, a double orthopedic mattress. It wasn't so much about the mattress itself, but rather its dense polyethylene wrapping, which analysis revealed had been used to transport Luz Maria's burnt remains. Additionally, several neighbors testified about having repeatedly heard Jorge verbally abusing and threatening his wife with death just days before her sudden disappearance. Her husband had shouted that he would kill her if she decided to leave him, and that he would hide her body so that no one would ever find it. Based on the data collected by expert criminologists, as well as the testimony of several witnesses, the investigation presented a gruesome picture of the crime. The murder occurred on the night of January 19, 2021. The day before, the couple had a big fight, and Jorge once again resorted to violence with his fists. He had previously had issues with his temper, but this time he went into an uncontrollable rage. He struck his wife multiple times, causing her to scream and cry for help. These screams were heard by their neighbors, but nobody called the police. During the beating, Jorge broke his wife's nose and caused a head injury. After this brutal assault, he strangled her with his bare hands and then attempted to dispose of the body. He dragged it into the backyard, doused it with campfire liquid, and set it on fire. However, Jorge did not anticipate how smoky and foul-smelling the burning flesh and hair would be. Concerned that neighbors might notice and call the fire department or police, he quickly extinguished the fire. He wrapped the charred remains in plastic and sought a secluded location where he believed the body would never be found. The most horrific aspect was that Jorge committed these acts in front of their young daughter. Despite her tender age, she somewhat comprehended what was occurring. The child, 3.5 years old at the time, witnessed both the beating and subsequent murder, as evidenced by her cries and screams, which were also recorded. Aware of some forensic techniques from his wife's textbooks at home, a fact due to their abundance, Jorge attempted to cover up his crime and establish an alibi. He found a dark stretch of road without lights or video surveillance cameras and disposed of his wife's body in a drainage sewer there, thinking he could go unnoticed. The next morning, he drove to her place of work along the usual route, as if he had taken Maria there just as he did every morning. The following day, he began to simulate an active search for his wife, calling her colleagues, acquaintances, and relatives. The criminal's lawyers delayed the trial as much as they could. They also attempted to throw the investigation off track. They insisted that all the evidence and witness statements were circumstantial, emphasizing that not a single piece of evidence unequivocally proved Georgie's guilt. Defense attorneys tried to get the detention changed to house arrest. They argued that George himself was deeply depressed due to being accused of killing the woman he loved and the mother of his child. However, decisive evidence came from data obtained from Maria's phone. All this time, the device was in her husband's possession. On the first day after the crime, several messages were sent from it to different people in an attempt to create the appearance that Maria was still alive. Tracking all movements of the smartphone that day showed it was constantly in the same places as Jorge's phone. Despite this evidence, lawyers tried to turn it in favor of their client, claiming Jorge found his wife's phone and drove around with it searching for her. Yet no one could explain why he was sending messages from it or calling it from his own cell phone. Another proof of guilt was bruises and scratches on Jorge's body found on the day of his arrest. These marks were photographed by experts and indicated that Maria clearly resisted. The most vivid was a scratch on his neck. Unfortunately, particles of Jorge's epithelium under Maria's fingernails couldn't be found because they were destroyed by fire. Despite many controversial points, the prosecutor asked for the maximum possible punishment for Jorge. Court hearings and proceedings were repeatedly postponed due to the raging worldwide pandemic. But in October 2022, Jorge was finally found guilty of his wife's brutal murder and sentenced to 50 years in prison. Although he maintained his innocence throughout, custody of little Alice was given to her maternal grandparents, who admitted their granddaughter now holds the main meaning in their lives. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.